Hello and welcome to Biber Hunter's Game Models. In this video I want to give you a summary of how I built this Ryefield Panzer IV model and show you the techniques I used. So, if you think this might be interesting to you, please stay tuned. This is the vehicle I will be building in this video, the Ryefield Panzerkampfwagen IV Ausf.H with a Ryefield upgrade kit. I will again use the tracks designed by Tank brochure I bought at Kals3D.com. These tracks are my favorites I used so far, but later more to that. And to add more details and make the tank look more lived in, I will use several more 3D printed add-ons like jerrycans and ammunition boxes and some infantry equipment. I am very curious to use this model jig designed and printed by Kevin from Stoffel's Panzerkeller. I have this turret holder and a holder for the hull, and I'm really looking forward to test these. Because there is no dedicated upgrade set to this special Panzer IV kit, I had to use one that is almost 99% matching. But because of this, the upgrade set instruction wasn't matching to the instruction from the kit. So, before I started building, I had to thoroughly go through the instructions and see which parts I had to place where and on which instruction side this step was, to not miss an important part and regret it afterwards. I started the build with the assembly of the lower hull and the running gear pretty much out of the box. This is always a good way for me to go back into plastic scale modeling, getting a feeling for the parts and the smell of plastic glue again, as these parts will be hidden under tracks, side skirts and mud and earth anyway. As I am not doing this every week or month, spending a good amount of the year with painting resin figures, this is always a comfortable way to get back into the theme. Putting together all the road wheels was as much fun as always. Sarcasm incoming. And my Dremel was a great help to clean up all the casting seams which ran over all the rubbed areas. This way this not very interesting job was done in a pretty short time and I could move on to the more interesting stuff. I added some damage to the wheel's rubber parts to make them more interesting and a bit less monotonous, and then test mounted them onto the running gear. I will keep them removable for easier painting, but I always assemble the vehicle completely to see if everything is fitting. And I finished the wheels with a layer of thin plastic cement over the rubber parts to smoothen them from sanding and adding damage. The gearbox cover was the first part where I started with modifications, because there were these gaps between the part and the hull. And I wanted to close them in style with some custom weld seams. But first I reworked the flame cuts in the front section with a sharp hobby blade and again smoothened them out with a coat of thin cement. I then started with removing the casted seams with a scribing tool, and because they were at the edge of the part, I used a metal angle to guide my scriber where it was possible, because that made my scribing work more accurate. After adding the hatches and details like spare tracks to the gearbox cover, I glued it in place, filled the just scribed gaps with green stuff 2-part putty and started to press the weld pattern into it. I here used a C-shaped piece of thin metal, in this case from a cola can, glued to a toothpick. I made sure to keep my C-shaped tool slightly wet so it's not sticking to the putty. Next I added armor texture to the thicker front plates with the legendary mixture of Tamiya basic putty diluted with thin plastic cement. I like this technique a lot because it's pretty easy and relaxing, and adds a new look to the model because of the texture it creates, and it changes the color of the areas, unless the kit's parts aren't grey too. I continued building the lower hull with the side fenders, and I here have to admit that I was a bit disappointed. There were very few printed and photo etched parts in the upgrade set, like tool clamps or jack holders, especially compared to the Ryefield Stuk I built last year. This is not super bad because most of the stuff on the fenders will be covered by the side skirts and foliage camouflage later anyway, but it somehow felt a bit loveless using these plastic tools with clamps where only the handles were small PE parts. So I started my printer and tried to add as much parts and details as possible without spending too much money on STLs, as I will only use them every few years or so. The front fenders were the first bigger PE parts and I here decided to solder them. This creates a stronger bond between the parts, making them more durable, and it's a good way to close the gaps at the bent edges. When the lead cooled down and got hard, I sanded it smooth, matching to the PE part's surface. And with the dentist pliers I added some subtle damage to the fenders, as in the meantime I became a fan of not totally destroyed vehicles. The back fenders were also soldered, using my soldering pen to add some soldering fluid to the piece before touching it with the iron. This helps the lead to get a better connection to the brass parts. I am no expert when it comes to rolling small PE parts, but I somehow managed to build the hinges for the front fenders and then could glue these to the vehicle. Bergswerk thin black PE superglue was really helpful here, because it dries super fast when applied thin and there was no need to hold the parts in place for field minutes. The plastic fender springs were glued in place and then the spring part removed, so I could use the heads only. With copper wire twisted around the drill bit, I then made my own fender springs, which have much more detail than the plastic parts and are way easier to assemble than the springs from the upgrade set, because they are less stiff and more flexible. With a few drops of super glue I fixed these nice details in place and the whole action took me only a few minutes. Now, with the lower hull finished, I built the upper hull, and after removing the casted welds, I filled the gaps with 2-part putty and a moistened toothpick. This is the best tool for this job because the putty won't stick to it. And with my C-shaped welding tool added the welding pattern to the putty. Splitting the build in sections like this keeps me more motivated and makes the building more fun compared to making all seams or PE parts in one step. This switching between gluing plastic parts, adding welds, texture or PE parts is more entertaining to me. Therefore, adding the armor texture to the upper hull side was a refreshing variety again. Another fun job is making custom handles, and on the engine deck's hatch I had my first opportunity. I used 0.5mm copper wire, bended it in the matching sides, and after putting it in place I added a good amount of super glue to the underside to make sure it's not moving ever again. Now I could finally marry the lower and upper hull, and after applying an appropriate amount of plastic glue to the upper hull, I joined the two parts and made sure they are sitting perfectly in place without any gaps remaining. And that's the hull after the basic build. I always like to look at the model in this unpainted stage with all the different materials and colors still visible. Then came the first tricky challenge, building and adding the side skirt holders. Just like on my Sturmgeschütz last year, it's not only a challenge to build all these different shaped holders, but also to assemble them to the model in the right position and angle, so the cross beams will fit and sit perfectly. So I constantly checked the position and angle of the just added holders in case I had to make immediate corrections, before fixing them in place with a bigger amount of super glue, so they hopefully won't come loose again while painting or weathering, or because my clumsy self will hit them. Before adding the cross beams I wanted to build and add the tracks, so there was less danger that I would damage the beams when adding the tracks afterwards. tank brushers tracks are really superior in design and functionality, so it was an easy choice to use them again. I supported and printed the track links in bars of 11, and after releasing them from the supports, put these 11 links together to one section. The Panzer IV needed 99 track links for each side, so I needed 9 bars for one track. After cutting the pins from the support base, I plugged them in on one side, building the section piece for piece. I then turned the section around and added the pins to the other side. The pins are self-securing, so they won't fall out again, making the track super endurable and movable. With all for one side needed 9 sections done, I put these together to one track, and in less than an hour had this unpopular job done with more fun I sometimes had with metal tracks. I really highly recommend these tank brusher tracks. Even printed tracks from brands aren't this good in my opinion, with pins falling out by only looking at them, or less details like the guiding teeth being not hollow. Another tricky job for me is to mount the tracks without damaging the model. I carefully guided the track through the guiding rollers, and the movable model jig was a great help here. After assembling the driving wheel, I wanted to connect the track links on the underside, but unfortunately I realized that the track was too short for the model. I don't know why or for what reason it was too short, but I had to add 5 more track links and could then close the tracks and secure them with a piece of copper wire. The ends were bended so the wire isn't sliding out and the track stays in place. Like this I can easily remove them later for painting, but know for sure now that everything is fitting. And the look changed drastically in a positive way with the tracks mounted. With the tracks out of the way, I could now build the cross beams for the skirt holders, and I here again decided to solder them for a stronger hold of the parts and to close the gaps. And you can here already see the mounting system for the side skirts, which would bring me in trouble in the next step. These cross beams were part of the upgrade set, and like I said before, it wasn't matching to the kit 100%. Instead of the triangle shaped skirt holders, they had these small angles, but that wasn't matching to the vehicle I was building here. So, after removing the angles and gluing the cross beams to the vehicle, I had to rebuild the triangles from copper foil. For that I made me a template from the plastic kit parts and scratched the shape into the copper foil with a sharp hobby knife. With scissors I cut out the triangles and like this could pretty quickly make the needed amount of parts. Now I only had to bend them into shape with my bending tool and cut the underside to the required length. I then placed the plastic kit's crossbeam with the triangles onto the photo etch crossbeam and marked the positions where I had to place the copper triangles, which were then glued into position. To make the triangles look properly installed and not only glued in place, I punched some rivets out of lead foil with an upside down drill in my hand drill and glued these onto the triangles. I wanted to do stuff like this for a long time, but I was lacking patience and lead foil. But a modeling friend supplied me with some lead foil, and now I was finally motivated enough to add these cool little details to the triangles. And I think this effort was more than worth to be taken. Now I could make the skirts, and as there unfortunately were no PE parts for the mounts, I here had to use the plastic parts from the kit. At this point I wasn't in the mood to build these parts from copper foil, as they will be more hidden than the triangles, and I already spent a good amount of time creating the triangles and lead rivets. First I made sure the skirts fit my triangles and then went on to add some wear and tear to them. You might have noticed that one crossbeam is damaged and the middle skirt missing, and I wanted to add some shrapnel damage to the neighboring ones. I saw that on a picture in an AK book and wanted to try to recreate it. So I started with drilling holes into the skirts and used my hobby knife to widen these, with pointing away from the impact zone. And with a sanding tool I sanded the material around the holes thinner, giving them an irregular shape. Last I added some bends to the edges with dentist pliers and a round bending tool. I tried to not overdo it here, as in general I was aiming for a not totally screwed up vehicle, so I tried to keep the damage limited on all skirts. I wanted to add one last detail to the hull because I thought this side was too empty for my taste. To use this space I wanted to build a jerrycan holder and used a leftover piece from the photo etch frame for this. I sanded the side smooth after cutting it out of the frame and then used my bending tool to bring it into shape. After gluing it into place I added a supporting beam and could then place the jerrycans, which I of course kept removable for easier painting. And with that the hull with all accessories was built so far. As expected, the skirt holders were the biggest challenge, but I think they came out okay. Right now I am not sure how much of the skirts I will use on the finished model and where I will place them. I will paint them all and then decide that later. I think it will depend on what will be visible of the vehicle and stuff like tools and the jerrycans after adding the foliage camouflage. I am also not sure yet if I maybe switch positions, like adding the middle skirt to the back position, just like the crew lost the back one. Like this I hope to make the vehicle look more combat used. The small front skirts will also be glued in place after painting, because they will be in the way while painting and mounting the tracks. So they are still missing at this point, but before I can think about painting I have to build the turret. So let's move on. Just like on the hull, I first built the turret's basic shape, including the integrated metal barrel and 3D printed muzzle brake, and after adding the armoured texture, reworked the weld seams in the more prominent areas to add more details. The welds here came out better than on the hull. It somehow felt like I found my groove again, and maybe I should spend more time building tank models, not only painting figures. I made the handles for the side hatches from copper wire again, bending them into the right angle with my bending tool and gluing them in place. At this stage I already noticed how helpful the turret jig is, and this would be confirmed in the next step, the turret skirt holders. To build the skirt holders I this time used the plastic parts as a template to bend them into the right shape. This idea was so obvious that I don't know why it came to me only now and not when building the holders for the hull. After bending I made sure they were fitting to the turret and reached the gluing points. And it was pretty easy to build the remaining holders this way. I then carefully glued the holders in place, making sure they hit the gluing points where the plastic parts would be glued in place. I also tried to arrange them that they were in line, so to say, so the skirts would sit straight. I think I mentioned it earlier that I screwed this part on a Panzer IV many years ago, so I wanted to make it better this time. One of the biggest challenges and something I was nervous in advance for the whole time was to get this big PE part into shape. My way for sure wasn't the perfect one, but this is how I tried it. To make it more flexible and lose some of the tension of the part, I heated it until it changed color and then let it rest on a heat-proof surface. My idea to use round objects to bend it into shape was, well, not very successful, as the part did not hold the shape like I hoped it would. So I had to bend it piece by hand, and it was, well, not very perfect. but somehow I got it into a useful shape. I removed the back holders from the turret because I thought it might be easier to install the skirt with the holders glued to it. The skirt still had a lot of tension in it, and like this I could arrange it better around the turret and reach the gluing points. It somehow worked, but please don't look too close. I guess when the model is painted and weathered, it will do fine enough. After building the doors with movable hinges, a detail I'm really proud of, I glued the smaller side skirts in place. This was way easier because luckily the gluing points were all matching thanks to my cautious work before. I didn't notice it at this point, but I made a mistake with the locking mechanism. Luckily I noticed it later and fixed it in time for the end of the video. With the nasty stuff out of the way, I could enjoy the rest of the build. For the cupola MG, I used a print combined from several files and the PE target sight from the kit. I placed it temporary with Ptfx so I can paint it separately later. With the turret done, I could finally take it out of the jig and unite it with the hull. It was really great to see the two components finally come together. I made sure the turret could move freely and the skirts didn't get stuck. Then I fixed the barrel in a position I liked and added a small amount of super thin plastic glue so it's not sacking down anymore. And that's the tank built. Looking pretty cool to me with all the different materials and the bling bling from the photo etch parts. Unfortunately, the small front skirts were not included as PE parts, so I sanded the plastic part thinner and attached them temporarily with Ptfx so I can remove them for painting and track mounting. I am not sure if this will be my final solution or if I will change them later, but for now they will have to work. The vehicle looked a bit naked, so I wanted to make it more interesting and look lived in. And I did this again with the help of 3D printed items. I placed personal items here and there and played around with the positions. The crew will be standing in front of the tank taking a break, so I placed items that would make them a bit more comfortable, like canteen cups and a coffee pot, Brotbeutel and mess kits. Of course, I will define the used items and final positions only after painting when the model is finished. Nothing was glued at this point. And with adding the obligatory bucket, so it's a legit World War II tank, this model was built. And that's it for today. I hope you liked this quick summary of my Panzer IV build. To me it didn't came out perfect, but in general I am pretty happy and satisfied with my result. It definitely came out better than my first try with the Panzer IV with skirts, although the turret skirts were the biggest challenge again. I am not sure if I will build another vehicle with this amount of skirts in the near future. Right now I am feeling more like building something simple like a Sherman tank as a next vehicle project. But first this model wants to get painted and weathered, so I will have enough time to think about this in the upcoming weeks. I do like the composition with the crew's equipment and personal parts, and I really wish I could jump into the future to see this thing finished. But I am also looking forward to the process of painting and weathering it. If you are interested in more detailed tank building videos, please check out my channel, you can find them there. I hope my video was interesting to watch and maybe even helpful. If you like what you saw, I would be very happy if you support me by subscribing, and I am curious to read your feedback and thoughts to my result. Und nein, das gibt es nicht auch auf Deutsch. So, enough said for today. Thanks again for watching. Good luck for your own projects, stay safe and until the next time.